Hi everyone, and welcome to our Queensland webinar this morning on Transfers 101, representing the seller. My name's Nicola Baker, and joining me for today's webinar is Nancy Medaffery. You've probably all realised that you are currently on mute, and you will be remaining on mute for the duration of this session. So if you do have any questions as we're moving through the topics, please type your questions into the Q&A box, which you see on your Zoom black panel. And myself and Nancy will attempt to answer those as we go through the webinar. And if we can't get to it during the webinar, we will stay behind to make sure that all of your questions are answered. Just a quick note to let you know that as of the 1st of April 2019, PEXA has ceased issuing certificates of attendance for webinars. If you do require evidence of your attendance to this webinar for CPD purposes, we do suggest that you retain your registration confirmation email that you receive from Zoom and any related notes or annotations that you make during this session. If you need some further information about how can I claim a point for PEXA training, please contact the Legal Practice Board or Law Society in your jurisdiction, or you can also visit the PEXA community, and there is an article on there about claiming CPD points for PEXA training. Before we get started with our webinar on Transfers 101, we are about to launch a poll. So you will see a poll appearing on your screen. We're going to ask you some questions about your knowledge and confidence regarding PEXA webinars. So you should see the poll up on the screen. You just need to make a selection as to how you would rate your knowledge and confidence regarding PEXA transfers. It is completely anonymous, so feel free to be as honest as possible. Excellent. Thanks everyone for participating in our poll, and we will just bring this poll up again at the end of the session and ask you the same question. Okay, so what's on the program today? We're going to give you a brief overview of PEXA and ARNEC. We'll then talk about some PEXA foundations. We'll complete a transfer representing the proprietor on title, also known as the seller. We'll show you the transfer guidelines in the PEXA community, the bank transfer checklists, and generally where can you get help after this session from the PEXA community. Please note that this webinar will be focusing on the steps of the seller. If you're interested in what does the buyer have to complete, we're running a webinar at 2 p.m. this afternoon, so save your questions for that particular webinar. We will be solely focusing on the role of proprietor on title. Please also note that all we can do in this webinar is show you the steps that are required to be completed in PEXA, and we are unable to provide you with legal or lodgement advice. So let's get started. PEXA and ARNEC. PEXA is an online settlement platform. In a nutshell, we allow you to lodge land registry documents with the land registry, and if your matter involves a financial settlement, well then we help facilitate that financial settlement as well. So PEXA is integrated with the State Revenue Office and the land registries in every state, which allows the fluid exchange of data and information. So we're going to be drawing in data from the Land Titles Office. We'll also be drawing in data from the State Revenue Office if we're representing the buyer. Now, typically, PEXA subscribers are financial institutions, legal practitioners, and licensed conveyancers. And the registration process is quite in-depth. So if you don't meet the registration requirements, you cannot become a PEXA member. ARNEC is the regulator of PEXA. ARNEC stands for the Australian Registrar's National Electronic Conveyancing Council. It regulates not only PEXA, but the PEXA subscribers, which are yourselves. The model participation rules, which are created by ARNEC, set out all of your client compliance obligations. A copy of these model participation rules can be found from the ARNEC website, and it's noted down there, www.arnec.gov.au. And I would note that down because for all your compliance related questions, we will be directing you to the ARNEC website. Now, two of the items that come out of that model participation rules, which I will highlight today, are the client authorization form and the verification of identity. So Rule 6.3 states that we must have a client authorization form from the client that we're representing, and we must use the form which is provided by ARNEC. A downloadable version of this client authorization form is available on the ARNEC website underneath the publications area, which I will show you in just a second. Hand in hand with the client authorization is the requirement to complete a verification of identity. So this is Rule 6.5 of the model participation rules. And it says that the subscriber must take reasonable steps to verify the identity of their clients or their client's agent. Obviously, the purpose of this is to reduce the risk of fraud. Now, you can either apply the verification standard, which is provided by ARNEC and is available on their website, or you can verify your client in some other way that constitutes taking reasonable steps. There are some very nifty guidance notes on completing the verification of identity available from the ARNEC website. Again, I'm going to show you that website now. So I'm just navigating to arnec.gov.au. So you can see that URL at the top of the screen. This is the home page of the ARNEC website. If we come over to the publications area, we can see you can download a full copy of the model participation rules. If you're looking for the client authorization form, you can come down to the forms area and click on forms and download a copy of the client authorization. And alternatively, if you would like some guidance notes on the model participation rule, you can click on that item. And it's actually really nice, easy to read help notes on how to comply with the model participation rules. So as an example, there's a guidance note on how to complete verification of identity. There's also one on the client authorization form, including how to complete that form. So everything is under the publications tab of the ARNEC website. So we've got a full copy of the rules. We've got the guidance notes to help us if there are items in there that we're not too sure about. And we've got the forms area, which includes the client authorization form. So we'll just pause there briefly to see if anyone has any questions so far on what is PEXA and what is ARNEC. If you do, you can type them into the Q&A box now. Okay, looks like everyone is good to keep on moving. So just to quickly show you before we move on to our PEXA foundations, this is what our client authorization form looks like. So this is a form provided by ARNEC. It is mandatory that you have one of these if you are completing PEXA transactions. And here's a copy of what a guidance note looks like. So this one that we're showing you is the verification of identity guidance note. They all generally look the same in terms of format. Okay, so PEXA foundations. What is a workspace? It's the most common term that you will hear when it comes to PEXA. So with our PEXA transactions, just like in the paper world where we would open up a file for our matter, in PEXA we open up what is called a workspace. And in the workspace, we complete all of our PEXA related tasks so that we can get our matter ready for settlement. So it's a little bit like our electronic file, and it's the center of all our PEXA activities for that particular matter. So when we open up a workspace, so we've got a new matter, we transact with the land registry. So we're integrated with the land registry, which means we can draw in data direct from a land title, and we can also get the land registry to check our documents and data prior to lodgement. With our transfer scenarios where there are multiple parties involved, we can invite other people to join us in that workspace. So in today's exercise, we'll be inviting in the buyer's representative to come into the workspace and complete tasks together. Within the workspace, we will most definitely be creating and signing documents. So in our scenario today, we'll be creating a transfer of land and we'll be signing that document electronically. If we were representing the buyer, we would have to complete our stamp duty assessment through OSR Connect. And again, the integration between OSR and PEXA allows us to draw that data into the workspace. When we finally get our matter ready for settlement, our workspace will process the lodgement of documents and the settlement of funds. So the workspace is really the meeting room where all the parties to a transaction come together and complete their tasks so that the matter gets ready for settlement. So when we're completing a PEXA transfer, we will usually see these 4 parties inside a workspace. And I say usually because it's not going to be the same all the time. Every matter is going to be different. But these are generally the 4 parties that we would see. So we would have a proprietor on title. This is the organisation that represents the vendor or the seller. If there's a mortgage registered on the title, well then we would see a mortgagee on title in the workspace as well. Because just like paper, they'd have to come in and create their discharge of mortgage. And then we've got our incoming team. We've got the incoming proprietor, so the organisation which is representing the buyer. And if that buyer is borrowing money from a bank, well then we will also see an incoming mortgagee. So a bank or a financial institution is going to be lending money to the buyer to fund the purchase. Now, like I said, sometimes we'll see all of these roles. Sometimes we will only see 3 or 2, or maybe we'll see more than these ones, but these are the main parties. In today's exercise, we're going to focus purely on the steps to be completed by the proprietor on title. There will be no banks involved in the transaction because their involvement in the transaction does not impact what we need to complete as a proprietor on title. So 99% of our tasks remain the same regardless of whether there are banks involved in the transaction or not. So as we go through the exercises, I will highlight to you what additional steps would this guy have to do if there was a mortgagee on title and a bank inside the workspace. So for that scenario, we have a pretend matter where we've got Maxwell and Margaret Black who have signed a contract to sell their property at 271 Ocean View Lane, Port Douglas, to William and Amanda Wakefield. We've got the Blacks who have an unencumbered title and the Wakefields who are purchasing the property in cash. So there are going to be no banks involved in this transaction. We've got Mr. and Mrs. Black represented by Kakadu Property Law and the buyers represented by Whitehaven Conveyancing Services. So we'll be taking the steps as Kakadu Property Law representing Mr. and Mrs. Black. Up on the screen, we can see a transfer flow chart. This flow chart shows us the high-level steps of what we need to complete in order to get this workspace to ready status. On the left-hand side, it says proprietor on title. On the right-hand side, incoming proprietor. So we're going to be focusing on the steps on the left-hand side because we're representing the seller in this transaction. So we're going to open up a new workspace for this matter. And in the real world, it does not matter who opens up the workspace. It could be the proprietor on title, it could be the incoming proprietor, and sometimes it's even the incoming mortgagee. important thing is that the workspace gets created and the relevant parties invited into it. So I've given that job to the proprietor on title today. So they're going to be very proactive and open the workspace. We're then going to review our land title details to make sure what's pulled through from the land registry is correct. We're then going to go and claim Mr. and Mrs. Black as our clients and then invite in Whitehaven Conveyancing Services. So I'm going to complete step 1 now, create the workspace. So to do that, I'm going to navigate to our training environment, which looks very similar to live, except it's just a pretend one. So I'm logging in as Zoe from Kakadu Property Law. So there we go. She's representing Mr. and Mrs. Black, the sellers. So I've got a new matter. I'm going to create a new workspace. Our jurisdiction's Queensland. And our role, we're representing the proprietor on title. We're going to put in our land title reference and we're going to select the validate button to check whether we can use it electronically. Now in the training environment, this duplicate land title message comes up quite frequently because we're using the same land titles over and over again for training exercises. So each item here is a different workspace which is currently open using this land title. So it's just telling me, are you sure you want to open up another one? This message will come up in the live environment as well. You probably won't see this many workspaces open. You might see one, and maybe that's because the other side of your matter has already beat you to it and opened up the workspace for this transaction. So you'd obviously be checking who's using it, in what role, and if you recognise that yes, Whitehaven is on the other side of my matter, and yes, they are representing the incoming proprietor, you then contact them and let them know that you're representing the seller and ask them to invite you into the transaction. So always make sure you do review this screen if it pops up in live, because it will mean that someone else in PEXA has a workspace open using this land title. That's fine for our training exercise, so I'll just say yes, that's okay, and we'll move forward. We'll enter in our workspace reference. This is our matter number or file name. A financial settlement is required. So whenever we're doing a transfer, we must always say, yes, a financial settlement is required. And the main reason for that is we need to be able to assess stamp duty through OSR Connect, and a settlement date and time is required for us to do that. So even if you're transferring the property for nil monetary consideration, that's okay. You still have to say a financial settlement is required and then set a date and time for settlement. Do we want to mark the land title references in this workspace as a parent? No, we do not. So we would only say yes to that if we're doing a subdivision or an off the plan. We'll then enter in our settlement date and our settlement time. So obviously the date's usually in the contract. The time will be selected by whoever opens the workspace. Other people can propose a different time if they don't like the 12 o'clock selection. This matter will involve a transfer, and we're going to request the land title data now so that we draw in the land title information from the land registry. Work groups are a little bit like filing cabinets for our workspaces. So if you have any work groups set up at your firm, you would file this into the relevant work group. So just think of them like electronic filing cabinets. I'm going to leave mine in the primary default and then hit the save button. So now that we have created our workspace, we can see that the reference is appearing at the top and a workspace ID has populated underneath. This is a unique number given to this particular workspace. So it's a good idea to get into the habit of noting this workspace ID down. So if you have a physical file in the office for this transaction, note it down nice and clearly at the front of the file. You will need that if you contact PEXA support. The party details are not provided yet because we haven't created any parties. The property address has not pulled through because, as we know, in Queensland, the Land Registry does not hold those details, but we can see that the settlement date and time has populated on the right-hand side. We've got two status bars, the lodgement bar and the financial settlement bar. So the lodgement bar relates to our document status, financial settlement relating to our finances. Currently in preparation, which means work to be done, we need to take steps to get these bars green and at the ready status. So we want our documents to be good for settlement. We want our finances to be ready for settlement as well. We will not be able to settle until we get to this ready status. We've got some outstanding tasks here to jog our memory of what needs to be completed. We've got details of participants, so who's in the workspace, who's accepted the settlement date and time. There's only us in there at the moment. No documents currently created, and financial settlement, nothing's been done there. So it's very at the beginning of this matter. So the workspace summary is giving us a holistic overview of where we are at in this transaction. If we take a look at our flow chart, we've completed step one, which was to create the workspace. We're going to move down and review the land title details and then move on to the participant screen. So you'll see the blue left-hand panel. We're going to work down this left-hand panel. So the first thing we want to do is check the land title details. So we'll click on land titles. We can see the reference which we entered in, and we can see some data has pulled through from Land Registry. You'll see that the address says not provided, and that's because the Land Registry does not hold that information, and we will be needing to add in the address for this property. So we'll select add address, and we will, for every transfer that we do, have to manually add this in Queensland. So we enter in the address and we just hit the save button. So it's only ever required when we're doing a transfer of land, but it is mandatory. You will not be able to get to the ready status until that address has been entered in. We can see the details of the proprietors have pulled through. There are no mortgages on this title. There's no caveats. If there were, you'd be seeing them on the screen. It's telling us that a paper certificate of title is currently issued. So Mr. and Mrs. Black hold the paper title, and it's telling us that this must be surrendered to the Queensland Land Registry before settlement. So if you represent a party that has a paper certificate of title in Queensland, you must make sure you surrender it to the Queensland Land Registry before settlement takes place. Down the bottom, we can see it says perform title activity checks. So you may already be aware of these checks which are performed on your workspace. So when we open up a PEXA workspace, the system does a check on the title for the preceding 60 days and returns a message, either negative or positive. So negative means in the last 60 days, there's been no activity on this title. Positive would mean there has been activity, and it would say activity identified, and we would be able to see what has happened on that land title. So there would be an area here called view details, and would be able to check what had happened. As we get closer to settlement, we start doing more checks on the land title. So when we're a month away from settlement, the system will do an automatic check every week, and it will return a message, negative or positive. If it's positive, which means activity has been picked up, you will be emailed and notified. Once we get to a week before settlement, that check is done every day. And on the day of settlement, a final check will get done 55 minutes before settlement is due to take off. Again, if there is any activity noted and picked up, your firm will be emailed and notified, and you'll need to investigate that activity in the usual channels. So if it tells you that a caveat was picked up, you will then go and search that caveat. And just coming up to the top of the screen, we'll see there's a big blue button on the right-hand side saying Add Land Title. So if you've incorrectly added in a land title, so that's not the correct one, we can use this blue button to add in the correct one and then remove the one that we no longer need. So that's our land title screen. I'm happy with that. All the data looks correct and I've added in the address. I'm now going to move on to participants. We can see that Kakadu Property Law are currently sitting on the screen with no parties underneath them. Their clients, Mr. and Mrs. Black, are sitting below as unrepresented, so no one has claimed them as their client yet. The reason they're on the screen is they've been pulled through from the land registry information. So we need to claim them as ours, and the way that we do that is we select the action cog and select Edit Party. Under representation, we'll say, I represent this party. They're not a panel master. So a panel master is a bank or a financial institution, and they're not a frequently represented party. So we don't do work on a regular basis for them. They just come to us off the street. So you won't be seeing them in the drop-down box because they don't fall into either of those categories. Their role has populated and their party details have populated based on what's on title. So Margaret Black, that's her name still, which is great. Name suffix is optional, so you can see there's a little information I telling you it's things like junior, senior, PhD or OBE. So if it's not relevant to your client, you can just leave that field blank. The date of birth is mandatory. So I will have to fill that in. And remember, we've done our VOI, so we should have those details. And PEXA Key is an additional app that you can use to communicate with your client about the settlement, and you can actually get them to provide bank account details into the workspace so that their vendor funds can be paid into that account. So it's like a secure app where the vendors can actually put in the account that they wish to receive their surplus funds, and those details will come straight into this workspace as opposed to having to email, which is a non-secure way of communicating bank details. We're actually going to be running some PEXA Key webinars in the next few weeks, and these will be advertised on our community page, so keep a lookout for PEXA Key webinars. The next question, land titles where the party is an involved party. So it's just bringing up the land title that we've entered in. And has this party previously held land in any other name? This is an optional question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. It is really for the State Revenue Office. So has Mrs. Black previously owned land as Mrs. Smith? Yes or no? If you haven't asked the question, just leave it blank. Address details for our Queensland transaction, a future correspondence address is mandatory. So I'm going to click the Add Address button and enter in Margaret's future address. So we can see here it's for Margaret. I'm going to put in her residential address, and she is going to be moving into a house. Now, if you don't know what these details are straight away, that's okay. You can actually hit the save button on this and enter in the address details at a later date. And you can even enter them in directly into the transfer document. So once I've done that, it takes me to the top of the screen so I can review all of my details, making sure they're all correct. There's my address, which I've just added in. But remember, if you don't know where they're going to be moving to, you can actually just wait and enter them in onto the document screen directly. I'm going to hit the save button on Margaret, and we should be married up with her, which is perfect. That's what we want to see. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing very quickly for Maxwell. So we're going to action cog and select edit party. Now, guys, I totally appreciate that sometimes you won't represent both proprietors Maybe another practitioner is going to be doing Maxwell. That's okay. We would just invite in the practitioner that's representing Maxwell. So you obviously wouldn't be completing this part because he's not your client. So if you weren't representing Maxwell, you would just leave him as unrepresented and then come in and invite in the practitioner that represents Max. So we'll just pause there because we've gone through quite a bit of information so far, and see if anyone's got any questions about parties or the land title screen or the workspace summary. Just type them into the Q&A box now. Okay, so looks like everyone is good to keep moving forward. We do actually just have a last minute question that came through here. Can we complete matters with 2 lots on 1 title? Absolutely, you can. So on the land title screen, you just showing you the add land title button. So if you've got 2 lots on the same piece of land, we can add in that land title. So you just say add land title and add in the additional one. All right. So let's go back to our flow chart. We've completed step 3. We've edited the unrepresented party, which was Mr. and Mrs. Black. We claimed them as ours. We now need to invite in the incoming proprietor. So at this stage, we would be on the participant screen. And the big blue button at the top, invite participants. So we'd use this to invite in any participants that need to come into the workspace. So it could be the mortgagee on title, it can be the incoming proprietor, maybe there's a caveator that needs to be invited in. So we can just simply type in the first few letters of the firm's name. We find Whitehaven Conveyancing. They are representing the incoming proprietor. The title populates and the address is pulled through because we've entered it in previously. And then we say, who are they representing? So they're representing William and Amanda Wakefield. So you're putting their clients' names in there so that when they receive the invitation, they can identify, oh yes, that's our client. In the notes section, you can put in any other relevant notes which would help them to recognize this transaction. I'm just putting in Nicola's webinar invitation because we'll be using this invitation for our afternoon session. If we had a mortgagee on title, guys, we would use the add another participant button and fill in the details of the bank that we need to invite in. We haven't got a bank, so I'm going to remove that and hit send invitations. And we can see here it says invitation successfully sent, and we have Whitehaven pending, so we're waiting for them to respond. So we've done everything we can do on the participant screen. If we have a look at our flow chart, it now says we need to monitor the workspace because we have to wait until Whitehaven Conveyancing accept our invitation and come into the workspace. They need to create their parties. They need to prepare their documents, and they need to complete stamp duty. So obviously all the heavy lifting is happening on the incoming proprietor side. So what we're going to do is we have a pre-prepared workspace where Whitehaven have come in and completed all of their documents. And we're going to come in to a workspace where we are ready to edit our Form 24 Part B. So time's passed. Whitehaven have come into our workspace, they've joined us, they've completed the documents. We're now going to navigate to that workspace. In the real world, obviously, it would be in the same workspace. It's just for our demonstration purposes today. So time's passed, we come back into our workspace and we can see that all of these documents have been prepared. So Whitehaven have been very busy. They've been preparing the transfer, they've edited their Form 24, and they've completed stamp duty. We can see here that our Form 24 is still in preparation status, which means work to be done, and our work is to action cog and edit it. We need to fill in the details. So this should look almost the same as the paper version, so I won't go through the details too much. So it should just be asking us the same questions as what we see in paper. So we can see the details have pulled through from the transfer, and we'll have a look at that transfer in just a second. And again, these details have come straight from the transfer of land. We can see they're actually all greyed out. So there's not much for us to do. We just make sure that they are all correct. We answer whether there is GST, whether any of the transferors are a non-Australian entity. Hit save. So that document should look pretty much the same as paper. Now that status has moved to prepared. We can see on this screen that our lodgement instructions are still in a status of in preparation. Remember, that means there's work to be done. So if I show you the flow chart, the work that needs to be done there is the incoming proprietor usually needs to edit the lodgement instructions to check the order of lodgement and then hit the save button. So that's that pink box on the right-hand side. Now, in our live transactions, if there's an incoming mortgagee, it will be the incoming mortgagee's job to edit the lodgement instructions and check the order of lodgement. In our example, we don't have an incoming mortgagee, so the role defaults to the incoming proprietor. And it's telling us here the responsible subscriber is Whitehaven. So what I'm going to do, even though it's not my job, technically to do it, I'm going to edit the lodgement instructions now just to show you what would happen. So it will bring up who the responsible subscriber is, and you just need to think of the responsible subscriber as the lodging party. So if you're ever not sure, well, who is the responsible subscriber, it's always the incoming mortgagee, and if there's no incoming mortgagee, the incoming proprietor. The order of lodgement is super important. So just think about how you would normally lodge documents over the counter. There is generally an order. So if there was a discharge of mortgage and a mortgage in here, we would be dragging and dropping the documents into the correct order. In today's exercise, we only have a transfer. So it's pretty easy. There's no other documents getting lodged. We just hit the save button. Our documents are now verifying. So we are now contacting the land registry and asking them to come into the workspace and check that all the documents and data match up and are acceptable for lodgement. And they've come back saying, well done, everything is successful. So that means we can move on to the next stage. Before we sign off on our documents, it's probably a good idea to view them. And we always use the action cogs to view. So we can action cog and view the transfer. So remember, this has been prepared by the incoming proprietor's representative, so we would always want to make sure that we check it before we put our signature on it. And if we've noticed that perhaps there was some information that which was incorrect, that's okay. We would hit the back button, and to fix up the error, we action cog and select edit. Anything that you edit in the transfer will then flow through to the Form 24. I'll quickly have a look at my Form 24 Part B as well. So just remember, all the information from the transfer flows into the Form 24. So if you need to make an adjustment to something, we edit the transfer. Brilliant, I'm happy with my documents. They're looking good. I'm now ready to sign them. So at this stage, I would insert my digital certificate, action cog, and select the sign option. It's showing me some details about this workspace so I can quickly identify where I'm at. And I'm not really looking at the destination line items because all I'm concerned about right now is signing the transfer and the Form 24. So we're just signing off on the documents. We haven't touched the finances yet. So just make sure that you can satisfy all of the check boxes. These are the certifications which come from ARNEC, and there are some guidance notes on how to make sure that you can satisfy these certifications. Remember that website, arnec.gov.au. So I can satisfy those, so I'm signing the documents. It's asking me for my matching PIN. And we can now see it says signatures 1 of 2. So if I click on that, it tells me I've signed it, and I'm clearly waiting for the other side to come in and sign off on the transfer. Excellent. We have viewed and signed our documents. We have only got one more step to complete in order for us to get to the end of our flow chart. So the last part is to complete the destination line items in the financial settlement schedule. So just think of it like we've completed half of the transaction, we've done the documents, we now need to work on the finances. So outside of PEXA or inside of PEXA, you may have prepared a statement of adjustments. So we're going to come into the settlement area. And we'll see in this settlement area that we have 3 tabs. We've got the settlement summary, we've got source funds and adjustments and payments. Source funds is where the money is going to be coming from to facilitate this transaction. So who's paying the money to settle this matter? So usually in most transactions it's coming from the purchaser, so the buyer, or the incoming mortgagee. Sometimes the vendor might have to provide funds if there's a shortfall, but generally it's going to be the incoming parties providing the money. Adjustments and payments, where is the money going to go at settlement? So you can probably think of this area as your check directions. In the adjustments and payments tab, we can see there is an inbuilt calculator. This is optional and you can actually switch it off so that you do not see the inbuilt calculator if you don't want to. So a lot of practitioners are quite comfortable using their adjustments calculator that they have outside of PEXA, and you can continue to do that if you want. If you would like to see your adjustments in the workspace, you can actually come in here and add them in. So we select a description. We treat it as paid or unpaid. We put in the date range for that payment. So I'm just making these figures up today, but obviously in the real world, you'd be putting in the correct figures. And it's then calculating that the purchaser needs to pay at settlement $218.21. So we hit the save button on that. Okay, so the purchaser will be paying to the vendor an additional $218 for the water rates. That figure then flows through into the settlement statement. So these details that you're seeing on the screen have pulled through from the transfer, the adjustments, and then the balance due to the vendor has been updated. So if you would like to, you can actually add in all your adjustments here and then download a nice looking statement. Alternatively, you can just complete your adjustments outside of PEXA and then you will not see this area there. What is mandatory, however, is regardless of whether you're doing your adjustments inside or outside of PEXA, we have to complete our payment directions. So these are our check directions. So we do our statement of adjustments. We work out what needs to be paid and by whom. We then need to come in and add destination line items. So think of these as like drawing checks. We can see that some checks have already been drawn, so PEXA fees are automatically populated, and so are lodgement fees. I'm going to pretend that we have got some council rates to pay, so I'll go add destination. Just to show you how to do it, we would select council rates. You can pay using BPay, which looks like that. Nice and easy, or you can do bank transfer. And remember, the details are always going to be on the rates notice. The associated subscriber is Whitehaven. They're the other party in this matter which has an interest in this payment. And then we're going to put in the account name, the BSB, and the account number. So again, these will all be available on the actual rates notice. How can you pay this bill? We copy those in, we put in the amount, and we put in the transaction description. So usually on our rates notice, it'll give us a reference number to quote when we're making the payment. We then hit the save button. And I'll just scroll past the adjustments to our payment directions, and there's my council rates. We can also pay our professional fees if we wanted to. So selecting professional fees from the category, we can select one of our accounts which we have previously registered with PEXA. I'm going to put it into my fee paying account. I'm charging $1,000 and I'm putting in my matter reference there. So like your file name, your matter number. This is the number that's going to appear on your account when the money gets deposited. Final account details you can ignore for practitioners. It's really for banks and financial institutions where they're moving funds around to lots of different accounts, and it's going to help them with their reconciliation of funds. So just ignore final accounts as a practitioner and you hit the save button. So again, scrolling down to we see our payment directions and we can see professional fees. The last item that I will show you, and that obviously you could be adding in lots and lots of different line items, but the last one we'll do is vendor funds. So the category, vendor funds. The destination account, you can either pop that into your trust account or you can just send it straight to the client's account that they have nominated. So you'd put in the details that they've given you. So we'll put in the account number and you'll see that there's a button saying confirm, and it's going to require us to enter in that account number again to make sure that it's correct. So we select confirm, enter that in again. We'll put in how much our clients are going to be receiving. And the transaction description, so what's going to appear in their account when the money comes in. So it's really very similar to doing online banking where we're entering in the account name, the BSB and the account details. Okay, so there's our line item for vendor funds. So what we're going to do, guys, is pretend we've entered in all of our checks or all of our payment directions. We're now ready to sign off. So we've got all of the checks in here that we would like to see paid at settlement. All we have to do now is scroll to the top and sign off. Before you sign, if you would like to view a statement of what you're going to sign, you can. So details of the workspace, the certifications that you'll be signing off on, and the payment directions. So you've got an option here to double check the details. You can print that off to paper as well just by clicking the right button on your mouse and selecting print. I'm happy to sign off now, so I action cog and sign. Again, I've got another opportunity to check the payment directions. So I can check the account details, I can check the amount again. And then when I'm ready, I say, yes, I'm certifying the information in here is accurate. And we're going to select sign documents. So if we have a look at our flow chart, we should see that we are all the way down to the bottom of monitoring the workspace now. And all we're really doing is waiting for the incoming proprietor to provide the funds for settlement. So as we can see, our source funds are currently 0. So it'll be up to the incoming proprietor to provide the funds so that these are balanced out and that there's enough money to pay out all the checks. Once they have input those source funds and they've signed off on all of our documents, our workspace summary will move to a ready status. And I'll quickly take you to a workspace that says ready, so you know what it's going to look like. So this is a ready workspace. Our documents are ready, our finances are ready. On the document screen, you will see that all the documents are signed and successful, and all the signatures are appearing on the signature panel. In the settlement screen, we can see that our settlement summary is balanced, which means our source funds are matching the payments. So the incoming proprietor's representative has come in and provided source funds, and the fund status of those funds is ready. So the money's cleared and has been authorized. So what will happen, because we're at the ready status, at the scheduled date and time, the workspace will lock, and these green bars will start moving across. So our documents will start lodging and funds will start settling. That's as far as we can go in our demonstration today, because in our training environment, our workspaces do not actually kick into the settling process. However, in our PEXA community, we have a very cool video called What Happens at Settlement. So if you go to community.pexa.com.au after this webinar, click on the Help Center and then go to videos, you'll be able to watch this video of what's happening when the bars are moving across. The video is only 1 minute and 40 seconds, so it's not going to take too much time out of your day. So our community homepage is community.pexa.com.au. I would encourage you to get familiar with the PEXA community, because it's where you can watch that video, but also where you can access lots of helpful materials. So if we go to the Help Center at the top of the community screen, we'll be able to have a look at workspace basics, articles surrounding transfers. We can do an interactive activity where we actually click through the same steps that I just clicked through in our training environment and practice doing a transfer. We can download a nifty help card, which will help us identify the steps we need to complete, and we can have a look at some videos. So in the video section here is where you'll find what happens at settlement. Just showing an example of some help cards. The ones that are up on the screen say representing the incoming proprietor, but there are ones called representing the proprietor on title. So you'd just be going to the Help Center and selecting downloadable help cards to then access whatever help cards you would like. So there's a help card for almost every transaction. Transfer guidelines. So I will quickly go through the transfer guidelines. because it's really, really important that we are all following the guidelines as much as we can. These guidelines have been developed through industry-wide collaboration with the intention to meet the needs of all of our PEXA subscribers, so being practitioners and banks. We have a working group which comprises practitioners and banks. They get together and review these transfer guidelines periodically. The objective of the guidelines is to help you determine what you need to do and when. It also helps you to understand when other participants need to complete their tasks. And just important to note that they do not override any contractual obligations. So where can you get these transfer guidelines? From our PEXA community. And I will show you that now. So I'm at the home page of our community. And from here, you can see there's an area called Browse by Topic. So you can either click through Browse by Topic until you find transfer guidelines, or you can type into the search box transfer guidelines. Either way. Okay, so I will click through to find transfer guidelines. And on here, we will be able to see the guidelines individually. So number one is workspace preparation. When do we need to accept and decline? So it's telling us everyone needs to accept or decline an invitation within 2 business days. So we can either look at them all individually or just scroll to the bottom of the screen and click the PDF. And like I said, you'll actually be able to see what do we need to do, but then also what does the other side need to do and when, and what does the bank need to do and when. So I won't go through all of those. I really just wanted to show you where you can locate them. So just remember, guys, you can either search for them in the search box or go to the Browse by Topic area and scroll through. The other thing that I wanted to show you regarding transfers are the bank transfer checklists. So some of the banks have provided checklists for practitioners to follow if they are doing a transaction with them. And this is obviously because each bank has their own individual sort of processes. So we just come in and we search for bank transfer checklist. I'm going to click that first option there. And like I said, not every bank has one, but some banks do. So just as an example, I'm going to select Suncorp. Okay, and it's telling us, well, what do we need to do if we're acting on a sale? How do I initiate a sale request with Suncorp? Okay, so they want you to send the completed discharge authority to this particular email. Invitations, I want you to send an invitation to them via PEXA at least 15 days prior to settlement. Okay, and information about the payout process. So these are really good if you have a bank that you're working with and they do have one of these checklists. I would encourage you to have a look at them. And we're getting towards the end of our webinar, guys, but if you are interested in future webinars, we do have a dedicated webinar page on the community where you can go to and have a browse around and see what is on offer. So to access the webinar page, we go to the home page of community.pexa.com.au and we merely just scroll down the page until we see the webinar tab. And here are all of the webinars which are currently available. If you would prefer and you just want to look at Queensland, you can click Queensland and see what's coming up. So lots of Transfer 101 webinars. We also have a bunch of recordings already in there. So if you're interested in something that's already been run, so maybe you're going to be doing New South Wales transactions as well. We can see there are transfer webinars for New South Wales. So there really is something for everyone in our webinar page. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, guys, we will put another poll up to see how you're feeling now, having watched this webinar. So we're going to launch the poll right now. And if you're still on the line, if you could make a selection, now that you've attended PEXA Transfer webinar, how would you rate your knowledge and confidence? Like I said earlier, it's completely anonymous. You can be as honest as you would like, but it's really to make sure that we can be providing really useful webinars and learning content to assist you with your transactions. Brilliant. Thank you everyone who participated in the poll. We really appreciate your feedback. That's all we've got time for today, guys. Thank you so much for logging in to hear us talk about Transfers 101, representing the proprietor on title. If you are interested, we are running Transfers 101, representing the incoming proprietor at 2 p.m. today. So if you haven't registered, go to our webinar page and click on the tile for Transfers 101, representing the incoming proprietor. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you this afternoon.